Where you position the golf ball in your stance really does matter, and yet many of you are confused about this relatively simple topic. Let's cover correct ball position with all of these clubs in your bag, from fairway wood, hybrid, irons, and all the way down to wedges. To fully understand ball position is to recognize that measuring ball position with where you place the ball relative to your feet is incorrect. I made this video, which has had over 250,000 views on the channel, regarding ball position with the driver and why 99% of you are getting it wrong. This same message applies to the rest of the clubs in your bag. The lead shoulder is the center of the swing, and that's where we should be measuring the ball position from. Once you understand that simple but vital piece of information, ball position is no longer confusing. It becomes crystal clear on exactly where you should be positioning the ball for every club in your bag. And one of the easiest ways to really understand and to see this is to use the stack and tilt grid that I have built onto the mat here using the T-claw. This diagram is super helpful at being able to show you how ball position doesn't really correlate to the feet, but instead much more towards this lead shoulder. If I was to set up with an 8-iron that I have here and position the ball in what I would consider to be a fairly standard place for my 8-iron, or any mid-iron for that matter, I would be placing it somewhat centrally relative to my feet. But again, remember that the most important thing here that we're using to measure this ball position is the lead shoulder. That lead shoulder is referenced with the grid by this straight line on the ground, the one that's going directly towards the camera. That is the 0 point, or the bottom of the swing. 0 meaning the lowest point, the point where the center emanates out towards the edge of the arc. That's the bottom of my swing arc right there. And for every club that you hit from the ground, you want to place the golf ball behind the center. That could be a small amount behind the center, maybe for a fairway wood or a hybrid, we'll get onto that shortly, or slightly further back for the shorter clubs. But understand that every single club that you hit from the ground should be positioned slightly behind the center, because we're trying to encourage an attack angle that is somewhat down, where the club is traveling down when it makes contact with the ball. That's true for every club that you hit from the ground, even the fairway woods. So using the lead shoulder as the reference is the absolute key, and then positioning the golf ball behind that lead shoulder to some extent is going to be correct for every club that you're hitting from the ground. And so with the basic understanding of this grid diagram, I can now use that 0 point, that reference line of the low point being underneath the center of the swing, to reference my ball position, just using a very simple coding system. If I was to position the ball one ball back behind the center, that would be applicable to my fairway woods and to my longest clubs, fairway woods, and maybe my longest hybrids. So I'd have the ball just one ball behind the center. That's going to ensure a slightly downward angle of attack, while still being able to have a shallow enough hit that I'm not hitting down too excessively with these longer clubs. We know we want to sweep these a little bit more from the ground. Move the ball 2 balls back in the stance, 2 balls behind the center, and that could very well work for a more lofted hybrid, or we're getting into the sort of longer to mid irons, a 5-iron, a 6-iron. That's going to be somewhere just 2 balls back from the center. And then the furthest back I would tend to encourage you to play any shot with a standard swing or standard stance would be 3 balls behind the center. That's going to look more like where I'd position my 8-iron, 9-iron, or even my wedges. And once you understand that the ball position is relative to the lead shoulder, you'll also start to get a sense of how stance width influences ball position. The wider I make my stance, the more my lead shoulder is pulled back in space. So although I haven't changed the position of my feet, the position of the ball relative to this lead shoulder has changed as I widen my stance. The same's true when I make my stance narrower. So my shoulder moves more forward as my stance gets narrower. A ball position that looks to be middle to slightly forwards in this example now becomes back and further behind the lead shoulder. You have to understand that as you adjust the stance width with different clubs, the relationship of the ball to the center of your swing changes. This diagram on the ground from ball position 0 to ball position 1, 2 and 3 really encompasses every shot you'd ever need to hit with a standard swing. Unless you're trying to hit a particularly low shot or trying to manufacture something specific, these ball positions cover every single club in your bag. So those are the basic guidelines for ball position. Pretty straightforward when you understand how to measure everything from this lead shoulder. But you can play around with ball position to create different shot patterns depending on your tendencies. Ball position doesn't just influence angle of attack, hitting more up or hitting more down. Ball position also plays a role in the direction of the swing or the club path. The further back I place the ball on the grid, the further to the right I would be swinging when I hit this ball. That's because I'm positioning the ball behind or further behind the center, meaning the contact point happens earlier relative to this lead shoulder. And because we play golf on this tilted angle, as this club's coming down towards the low point, it's not only swinging down towards the ground, it's also swinging out towards that widest point right here. The same could be said if I was to place the ball excessively forward in my stance, put the ball in front of my lead shoulder. Not that you'd often see anybody do this, but the further forward the ball gets, the more the club is traveling to the left when it reaches the golf ball. That's the out to in swing that so many of you suffer from. And I can see a lot of benefits to helping golfers improving not only their ball striking but also their shot pattern, the shape of their shot, just by moving their ball position. And for many of you, this will involve having the golf ball further back in your stance than you're typically used to. Now, you can do that by just moving the ball back, or you could just move your weight more forward. This is why having your weight forward helps so many golfers improve their ball striking and the consistency of their shots. By moving the weight more forwards, you can do that during the swing, or you can set up with more weight forward. You're effectively moving the ball further back in the stance relative to the lead shoulder and building in more of an in to out swing path, which, as I say, so many of you are striving for. It gives you better distance, better predictability of shot direction. So if you want to improve your ball striking, moving the golf ball around relative to this lead shoulder could be something that would help you. Start by moving it further back in your stance relative to this lead shoulder, either by pushing the ball back a little bit like this, or by moving your weight more forward at setup to help encourage better ball striking.
I just want to hit one more so that you can see on the camera that there's no rolling of the wrist.
No releasing.
Right, no releasing. I'm going to do the Herald shot.
Okay.
Have the ball back the most, weight most forward, handle the most forward.
Now you see the biggest push draw. Now you see the biggest push draw.
So let's go ahead and hit some shots now with all the clubs discussed so far using our newfound understanding of ball position and how it relates to this lead shoulder. Start with the fairway wood. I've got a 3-wood here where the ball is just one ball behind the lead shoulder. That's going to help me have the least amount of descent. I'm not going to hit down too excessively whilst still making sure I do hit down slightly. That's important. And because the ball's closest to the lead shoulder, it's also going to have a swing path or a swing direction that is much straighter. That's going to help me to control the direction of these clubs. So ball position, one ball behind the center for the fairway wood. Let's go ahead and hit one. Not quite out the middle, a little bit towards the toe. That's why that thing's pushed, drawn back a tiny bit. It's fairly acceptable, well within the boundaries of the range there, 230 yards. Not out the middle, but very well controlled. This is the club, the fairway wood ball position is the one that I think most people struggle with because it's the one that's getting the closest to this lead shoulder, and therefore the balance between controlling low point and hitting down enough to make good contact without getting the ball too far forwards and getting it in front of the lead shoulder where the golfers start to swing across the ball. That would certainly be my observation where amateur golfers struggle the most with the longest clubs in their bag. So learning to position this ball correctly relative to the lead shoulder with this longest club is going to be very beneficial if you can figure this out. It will help you to get more consistent contact and better control of your shot direction. For the hybrid, we said we wanted that thing to be 2 balls back. So I'm just gonna, once again, reconfigure the grid here using the T-claw. I've now got this larger gap between the lead shoulder, the center of the swing, and where I'm gonna position the ball with the hybrid. This is gonna work probably all the way up to mid-iron, 6-7 iron is going to be okay if you could have this set up. You are encouraging slightly more downward hit here by having the ball further behind the center, which is ideal. So this is going to be my standard setup for hybrid all the way down to mid-iron. Definitely a better contact than on the 3-wood, more out of the center. I'm definitely hitting down more on these clubs, and I know we're supposed to do that. It was 220 yards, nice little push again, solid contact. I know I'm hitting down more, and that's good for me with these slightly shorter clubs as we're starting to progress through the bag. We want a more downward angle of attack that's going to help us to hit higher up on the club face, make better contact, and get maximum ball speed. So ensuring that you have the ball, again, correctly positioned for these clubs relative to the lead shoulder as we're moving through the bag is extremely important and will really transform the quality and the consistency of your ball striking if you can get this right. Next up is the 8-iron, and I haven't moved the grid here at all. I haven't changed the configuration of this on the ground. What I wanted to show you here was where I set up with my hybrid and had the stance as wide as I did, it puts my lead shoulder in a particular position. As I move down to something like an 8 or a 9-iron, I'm going to narrow my stance slightly, and in doing so, I'm just going to move my lead shoulder a little more forward, which relative to my lead shoulder moves the ball slightly further back. So I haven't really changed the ball position relative to my feet, but it has got slightly further back behind this lead shoulder. Just something to consider when you're measuring your ball position. 8-iron, ball's going to be just slightly forward of center if you look at the feet, but it's about 2 to 3 balls behind the lead shoulder if you look at the center of the swing as the reference. Let's go ahead and hit one of these 8-irons. Solid contact once again. I seem to have the pushes today, just moving everything out to the right slightly. 150 yard, 8-iron, pretty well struck. Again, making sure there's enough down built into this swing is going to help you to hit high enough up on the club face, 3, 4, 5 grooves up the club face, which is really where the sweet spot exists. Being able to do that encourages and influences better ball striking, better distance, and overall better golf. Finally, the wedges. This is my 54 degree, so effectively this is my sand wedge. And I am going to just move that golf ball back a little further, one more ball. So we're getting towards that 3 balls back in the stance condition now that we talked about relative to the lead shoulder. Stance width is going to be somewhat consistent with how it was with my 8-iron. So now I do need to move that ball back a little further to encourage slightly more of a downward strike on the golf ball. This is my sand wedge. Go ahead and hit one. By having the ball that little bit further back in my stance, I'm going to be guaranteeing even more of a downward hit. It's a 100-yard sand wedge, which is pretty typical, very straight. Hopefully you're not struggling too much with the directional control of clubs with this much loft, but what you're likely struggling with is the contact. Making sure that ball is positioned correctly relative to that lead shoulder is going to help you to hit down the right amount, which helps you control that low point, ultimately controlling that contact. The real truth of the matter here is you have to film your swing from face on and get a reference for how this looks and feels relative to the lead shoulder. But please believe me when I tell you that getting the ball position right relative to the swing center, the lead shoulder, not relative to the feet. You can still use the feet as a reference of sorts, but don't be fooled by the standard typical ball position explanation that's out there. It's not true and it's fooling you. I know from my own personal experience and from the lessons I teach on a daily basis how learning to control ball position relative to the lead shoulder is an absolute game changer. I hope you found the video useful. Get out on the range, give that a try, and let me know how you get on. If you'd like to learn more about stack and tilt, and in particular how the grid and the grid diagram can transform your understanding of ball striking and ball control, then I'd encourage you to seek out the help of a stack and tilt authorized instructor. If you can't do that, you should at least get to their website. I'll put a link down in the description below. Stackandtilt.com is the place where you're going to find more information about the grid and also a list of authorized instructors throughout the world. If you want to build the grid onto your practice mat just like I do, then you can go ahead and purchase some T-claws. I'm going to put the link down in the description below as well. For anyone watching this video, you'll enjoy a 30% off discount if you use the code S&T30. That's the T-claw. I'll put a link in the description and you can start building your own grid onto your practice station at home. Earlier in the video, I referenced the driver video I've made on exactly the same topic recently, the driver ball position and why you're getting it wrong. This is very much the next video you must watch if you haven't seen this yet. This will completely change the way you think about ball position with your driver.